Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing okay and can hear us fine. Could you please confirm in chat if you could hear me okay? And we will then get started. All right, good. Thank you. Yes, fine. So let me welcome James and Chris. Chris is after long vacation with us again, and probably Jamila would also join us today. So three of us right now, more would join, and we are all here to help you with your cloud journey. And feel free to reach out for anything which we could do to help in your cloud journey. We're getting a lot of messages. People are getting certified, people are getting interviewed, and we are very happy for that. And we are happy to that we could contribute a bit of that journey, and we plan to do more. So feel free to reach out. Any position you find in Amazon which could be interesting, you want to talk a little bit about it, want to get a little bit more idea about what the role may look like, so feel free to reach out and we would be happy to help. So we would have lots of content today. I'll quickly go through what is there in the agenda and keep your questions coming. Chris and James are helping me today with answering the question. So feel free to ask questions and we will respond as much as we can. If we can't, because of number of volume, probably just reach out to us on LinkedIn and we would be happy to help you out in that case. Okay. Thank you, everyone. We will get started and we will discuss what it is in agenda. I'll see you again in James and Chris in a minute. So let me share what we are going to discuss today. I'll quickly talk about what the agenda looks like and what we are going to discuss. So we will plan to discuss about monitoring and auto scaling. That is the main thing I want to discuss today. And then James will walk us through the three pillars of observability. Now, sometimes people get confused. Hey, monitoring and observability aren't the same. They have something in common, but not exactly. So we will talk more on that observability. And then later, Jamila would help us in understanding how the star technique works. There would be a lot of questions coming in Amazon interview, which are based on star. Like they expect you to answer based on the star method. Not very commonly done in other companies. This is very unique to Amazon, which I found. And this kind of knowledge can help you in your day-to-day when you are going through interview processes. So we will talk about it. We will take a sample question. Jamila will walk us through that, and probably we will have an exercise on LinkedIn group so that you could also contribute later. So let's get started with the first part of it. We will focus on monitoring and auto scaling. Okay, nice, good, thank you. Now we will discuss about one single service right now, which is CloudWatch. It doesn't mean that Amazon has or AWS has only one service. There are multiple, but this one is a very prominent one, which has very ubiquitous presence all over AWS resources. So I will talk about that. Yes, cruise control that is coming up. Hari, we will talk about it. We will discuss it. We will see how cruise control actually works. So we'll see that. Now let's move forward. The question comes why I should be monitoring. So what is the reason for somebody to monitor their infrastructure? Anyone? Let me know your answers in chat. Why you think monitoring is important? Why company would invest time and money and resources in monitoring? What is your rationale behind it? Why you think monitoring is important? Anyone? Why monitoring? To check utilization, why not? That your system is working appropriately, yes, exactly, nothing impossible. Infra application health status and trend, exactly. Performance, to stay alert, exactly. Like if something is going wrong, I want to know about it. I don't want my customer to say, hey Ashish, your website is not working. No, I want to be proactive in that. To make sure infrastructure and system fulfill business need, yes, true. Sometimes to fine tune, yes, we want to optimize the performance which we have taken or which we have implemented. Then to ensure that system are working as expected. Performance, health check and alert, yes, exactly. Quality delivery, yeah, I like agree to that. So I'll summarize some of the things which is there. Utilization, health status and performance. Yes, performance. Am I getting the performance I'm expecting from a system? I may think my system is responding in millisecond, but it may be taking minutes. So we need to check that. Second could be utilization. Am I reaching to the all the full capacity of my resources, or is there still some room available, or I have under provision or over provision? I want to know that, and that's why I would be monitoring. Then comes health. Is it working fine? Is it working as expected? Is it having any issue? So that's why I would monitor. And then probably for security too, I want to know, hey, how many bad attempts happen? Was somebody able to go to the part of application which was not expected? Has there any attempt of hacking into my application? So these all are the features why we would be using monitoring. So these are some of the example. Your use case may be different, little bit different, but the concepts remain the same. We want to be aware about what is happening in terms of performance, utilization, health, and security. That's why we monitor. And the service we are going to discuss today is CloudWatch. CloudWatch is a very commonly used service for most of the monitoring options in AWS. We have other services too, but CloudWatch is a easy to start and has a nice integration with most of the services. So what CloudWatch is, it's a monitoring and observability service. What is observability? James will talk about it, so I'll not touch on that, but let me focus on the monitoring part of it. CloudWatch can do a lot of things for you, not only one thing. That is the best thing about CloudWatch, that what you could achieve from CloudWatch, hey, you could get logs, you could get your metrics, and you could get your events. And not only get it, probably I could visualize it using a dashboard which can be automatically created for me, so I don't have to worry about building my own complicated dashboard. Lot of dashboards are built into CloudWatch and you could just get started from it, so should not be a problem. And you can get a unified view of your resources, application, and services that run on AWS, and this is important, on premises also. So it's not like only for AWS resources you could use CloudWatch, but if you can install an agent, which I'm going to talk in a minute, you should be able to leverage your on-prem infrastructure also. So one dashboard and you get information about everything from AWS resource up to your on-prem resource. So that is all possible through CloudWatch. We will discuss in detail. Now, some basic concept which you should know about so that you would have a better idea on how CloudWatch actually works. Let's talk about that. What are some of the basic concepts which we have to be aware about? Let's talk about that. So, so metrics is one of them. Metrics is data about performance. Some example I have noted here, that we have Amazon EC2 instance and its CPU utilization. So that is a metrics which I am looking into. That metrics will tell me how much I am utilizing for my CPU. Then there will be event. CloudWatch can track your events also. Events are different than metrics. Event is something happening. Somebody starts a EC2 machine. Somebody stops a EC2 instance. Somebody deletes a EC2 instance. These are all called your event. So events are also possible. You could check that EC2 instances changing from running to stopping. That's what we want to track. That is called an event. And I just want to track, maybe I want to take some action. Action could be as simple as sending an admin an email, or it could be as complicated as firing up a cloud formation template and then deploying a testing environment, removing that machine from production, installing it, getting it ready into test environment, and run some automation test on that. So those all options are available once you start using alarm features. And alarm can help you just to trigger an email or a complicated stuff which you could have defined in your own environment, right? So that's what CloudWatch basic terminology is. We would leverage some of them as we move forward. Okay. Can you extract then make dashboard with QuickSight, for example? Gustavo, yes, it is completely possible. You will get your data, right? Now, how you utilize that data, that is up to you. You could stream this information which you are collecting from CloudWatch to your own dashboard. Maybe you build that using QuickSight. Maybe you build it using Kibana. So it is purely up to you that how you are trying to utilize those information. Event is not counted with CloudTrail. Answer for that, CloudTrail takes care of your AWS API request. So it would be there. But what if I have a application which is very unique, which is not inside my cloud, which is not being tracked by CloudTrail, my own event which I want to track, or maybe third party. I have a Jira application, I have a GitHub application, I want to track event from there also, and that's why we would be having CloudWatch event, and that's the name has been changed. Now it is called Events Bridge. So that would help you in getting these things. All right. Can we get previous sessions recording, Nafis? Yes, you can. We will be, yeah, here is a link. So on this page, you can find all the resources. And on the resource page, you would find all the links for the other links. Thanks, Vijay, for sending the link. So that's the where you can find all the links. Okay. So let me get started here about this particular service that, hey, what this service is going to do for us and how we would leverage this service to benefit of ours. So we will focus on CloudWatch. Now, CloudWatch collects something called a standard metrics. Standard metrics is a default metrics which is collected by CloudWatch. You do not need to do a lot of effort to get those metrics. Those are automatically collected by system and made available to you. That's we call a standard metrics. If you want more granularity, you are looking for more controlled information coming directly from your application, right? So that time I may utilize a custom metrics, and I'll talk a little bit more on the custom metrics part too, that how custom metrics will work. If I give you a simple example, if you have an EC2 machine, whether its a CPU utilization is 10% or 20%, that would be detected by standard metrics. But within that EC2, if you have an Apache server running, and how much memory that Apache server is consuming, or how many logs is being generated by Apache, that time you would be looking into custom metrics. So custom metrics are giving you more deeper insight, which CloudWatch standard metrics may not be giving you. And to work with that, what you would need to install a CloudWatch agent. So this CloudWatch agent is a piece of software like you install any software. It is available for Linux and Windows platform. And once you have this software installed, this software can be configured to send its information to CloudWatch service. Obviously, it would be a secure channel. You would need permission to get data from your application to CloudWatch like a role. And once you have this data into CloudWatch, you would start getting information, and that information can be used for alarm, or you may do anything else with that, or maybe just watch it. No problem at all on that. So what scenario I am going to explain you, I would launch a EC2 machine. I would install CloudWatch agent in that, and through that, we would start sending some metrics to our CloudWatch service. That's what we are trying to achieve. Now, installing CloudWatch agent can be done in multiple ways. What I am going to do here to install this CloudWatch agent specifically, I am going to install it through a user data script. Probably everyone knows about user data script now. So user data script helps you in installing something within your EC2 machine while you are getting that instance ready for you. So I would log into my console, and from that console, I would get started by deploying a EC2 machine. And through that EC2 machine, I would be focusing on installing this agent. The script would be available. We would make this available in the resource page, and should not be a problem. And you can obviously find user data script on Amazon website to get this thing ready. Okay, good. So quick simple thing, I want to install a EC2 machine with basic setting, and I want to have my script also be part of it. So let's go ahead and install this particular service. So I'm going ahead and say, hey, I want to launch an instance. Okay, what I want to do in that instance, we will be installing the log agent, and through that, we would start collecting some metrics information from it. I would connect to it manually afterwards, and from there, I would start accessing some of the data. Okay. Hopefully everyone is following along. If there are any questions, keep them coming. We will answer it as many as we can as we go inside and talk about some other stuff. So give me a minute. Yeah, so I'm launching this. Let's call it test instance, test CloudWatch. Okay, then I have Amazon Linux. That is completely fine with me. 64-bit x86 instance type T2 micro is also fine. Key pair, I want to log in, and that's why I'm using a key pair which I already have. Key pair is a combination of private and public key by which you can log into an EC2 instance. It's like a automated way of username and password. Network setting, I am keeping everything default. I am allowing SSH from anywhere, so I could connect to it, should not be an issue. 8 GB hard disk, summary information, and I am interested here a little bit on the user data section. So in this user data section, what I'm going to do, I'm going to push that script by which I am able to get my agent installed, and it's not very complicated script. Let me quickly walk you through that. So what I'm doing here, I am updating that operating system. Then I'm installing Perl because the agent is written in Perl and it requires Perl libraries. Afterwards, I'm going to the user directory EC2 user, which is a default user on Amazon Linux machine. And in that, I am downloading this particular zip file, which is actually the CloudWatch monitoring script or agent, you could call it. I would unzip it, and once my work is done, I would remove the zip file. I would have unzip version of my agent ready for me, and that is good enough for me. Let me get started here. So I'm launching one instance, which is EC2, having a user data script to get my CloudWatch agent installed. Okay, it will take a little time, and we will then connect to it using SSH from PuTTY or any other client of your preference. It should not be an issue, and then we will see what kind of information we get from it. Okay, now one more thing. Default frequency of data collection for CloudWatch is 5 minutes. By default, it would collect data and aggregate data in every 5 minutes and display it on dashboard. That is called standard monitoring. If you want a little bit more detailed information, what you could do in that particular case, you could go ahead and say, hey, I want to enable something called detailed monitoring. Detail monitoring will aggregate and display your data in every 1 minute interval. It's little costlier because we are doing little extra work for you in every minute. So you would be paying little more money once you enable detailed monitoring, but I would enable it because I would get my data faster. In every 1 minute interval, I would start getting my information. That's what detailed monitoring is actually doing here. All right. So my machine is ready. It has got an IP address. Let's go ahead to this IP address and I would connect to it using PuTTY as a service so we can access the console of it and we would start seeing some of the information as it comes into my application. Okay. What else we are getting here? Questions are coming. Thanks everyone for answering and asking question. Let me connect to this machine. What I'm going to do now, I'm logging into that machine which we have just created. I'm logging in as EC2-user, and if you see this, I am connected. Let me do ls, and you could see my script is now available here. So I'm going there and say, let's see what is inside that. So cd aws scripts.mon, and if I see, there are files there. So there is a instance status.pl Perl script. Then there is a put instance get data, get instance information, and put instance information. These are the two scripts which I am interested in. And if you want to read more on that, there are some other files also available. So I'll clear it. And now my request is I want to inform and put some data. Where I want to put that data, I want to put that data into CloudWatch monitoring. Now, I could check information from this monitoring tab, which is by default there in every instance. So I get CPU utilization, disk read operation. So these are my standard metrics. But I am not getting here anything related to memory. Can anyone tell me why CloudWatch is not able to gather information about memory? Why memory information is not displayed here? What is the reason why memory information is not displayed? Anyone, any thoughts why this could be happening? Why memory data is not displayed by CloudWatch by default? What is the technical reason behind it? Has anyone thought about or you were not aware that memory is not by default reported? Anyone? Let me see answers there. I'm getting some answers there. So memory is rated with any storage disk? No, not like that. AWS cannot access the operating system. That's exactly the reason, right? So what happens when you say, hey, I am looking for a EC2 machine with 8 GB of memory. So what AWS environment is going to give you, it is, let's say this is your machine and you have this 8 GB of memory allocated, 8 GB RAM allocated. Our system says we allocated you 8 GB. Are you using it or not? I don't know. I don't know that because I cannot access your operating system by default. So your operating system has view of whole 8 GB memory. It may be using only 2 GB of that and remaining 6 GB would be free, but it is an operating system's control, not on Amazon's control, AWS control. But what you could do instead of this, if you want to that information, you could install a agent here. and that agent would start collecting this information and would send this data to CloudWatch, and now CloudWatch would be able to get your operating system information also. So that's why we are installing agent. Memory is not a standard matrix. This is a custom matrix, and we would need an agent to get this information through to our services. So let's go ahead and utilize this agent to run some of the test. Right. So I'm here. I would clear this out again one more time. Now what I'm looking for, I'm looking for running that agent which we have just downloaded. So that agent we downloaded was having a script which is basically going to verify my application. So the script I am going to run is your EC2 user and I am saying, hey, I want this information. Please run the script which is called AWS script mon put instance data.pl and tell me memory utilization. Verbose. Verbose means give me information right now, display it to me, and verify whether we are able to send this information to CloudWatch service or not. So I'm not actually sending any data. I'm just doing a verification here, and I run this. What I got here, it says memory utilization is 13, so it is able to get that information. That's a good. But it says no credential methods are specified. Trying default IAM role, no IAM role is associated with this EC2 instance. For more information, check this. What is happening here? Anyone, any thoughts why I am getting here? Whereas this resource found, we can send you the link. At the, we will send that link into chat. Question again, why I am getting this error? What is the reason I am not able to send information? Is it needed to configure CloudWatch or it is default already configured for a VM? Kanaya, default information is is going to AWS. We do not need configuration for default information. But if you are looking to put additional information, for that you would need to install configuration. You would need to install agent. No permission by default, no profile is associated with EC2. That's exactly what is happening. So what is happening? My machine agent is trying to talk to CloudWatch service, but that agent has no permission. One option to add permission is I could add my credential manually here, but it would be then stored into a plain text format. Instead of that, what I could do, I could go ahead and say, hey, let's create a IAM role. And through that IAM role, I would be assigning that role to EC2 instance, and then EC2 instance would be able to leverage the credential of that role. So we are now focusing on creating a role which would give my instance permission to talk to CloudWatch service backend. Right. So IAM lecture, if you missed it, check the previous videos. There we talked about what a role is. A role is a way to give temporary credential to a user or to a service. So we are now going to create a role which would have permission associated to access CloudWatch, and we would be then adding that role to EC2 instance. So I'm going ahead and creating a role. Not a very complicated stuff. You could create your own policies for it, or you could create your own, you could use existing policies. So here it says, select who is going to assume this role, whom you trust, who is going to use this role. It could be service, could be account, could be other services. So I'm assuming EC2 as my common use case. So I hope my EC2 instance would be assuming this role. So that's fine. Let me use that. Use case for other AWS services, I am not interested on that. I am only allowing EC2 to assume this particular role. And now I am saying, once assumed, what this EC2 instance can do, that is what I am adding as a permission. So I could search here and let's see if we have some CloudWatch related permission by default. If it is there, I can just use it. If not, I could create my own if the need be. So here it says CloudWatch agent admin policy, service policy. I am giving it a very generic permission now, which is not should be a case in production environment. I am giving it CloudWatch full access permission. So this CloudWatch full access permission would entitle my agent to start pushing this information to CloudWatch services. And now we would go ahead and start seeing this information. So let's start sending this role. Let's call it CloudWatch role. And I have selected this setting. I have added the policy and now my role is ready. Right. I haven't assigned the role. So creation of role is one thing. And afterward, you have to do what? You have to assign this role to a service so that it can perform the task you are expecting it to do. So I would first create the role. And based on that, I would assign that role to a service. Give it a few seconds. Let it come. Okay. Yep. Just creating role. We could see that. And now should be my role ready in a minute or so. We will see that in a minute. Okay. So I'm creating this role now. Okay. Now, while this is happening, let me show you one more thing. Let me go to the CloudWatch console itself. And there I would show you that what is available inside that. So I'm going to CloudWatch console and we would start seeing what is the current status of information. Okay. So this is my dashboard by default, which is coming up. You can obviously create your own dashboard if the need be, and I could start looking into metrics information. So I have option here, alarm, log, and metrics. So I am interested right now in the metrics, and I have selected all the metrics. It would start showing me what metrics are available for me. So the metrics which are available for me are these. EBS, EC2, I'll zoom out a little bit so you can have a better view. So these are all the metrics available for me. I am interested, let's say, on EC2 metrics. So I could select EC2. I could select a per instance metrics. So my instance which is running is currently displaying some information. What informations are? This is my instance, and then the instance ID, and it is showing me some specific information like test CloudWatch machine, CPU credit, CPU balance, CPU utilization. So that information is being displayed. So if I select it, that data would start populating. So it was on 0.3% and then it went down, and I could check this information on a 1 hour. This is what my CPU utilization metrics currently look for it. But I do not have memory data right now. Once my instance gets that role assigned, I would be able to see that information. So we will see that in a minute. I'm not 100% sure whether the role got created or not. It still shows role getting created. Let me open IAM again. Looks like that page has not responded properly. So let me try to open it again. I'll go back and access IAM service just to check if the role was successfully created or not. Okay, good. Everyone fine so far, hopefully. And now I'm trying to see the IAM role again to verify whether the role was created, and then I would assign that. Now, while this is happening, question to you. Once I assign the IAM role, do I have to restart my instance, or will it be automatically taken into account, or will it auto apply as soon as I apply the role, or do I have to restart my instance? What do you think? Is restart required? Do you need restart for your instance? Should auto apply, exactly. Restart is not required on that. So if you see this is my 00 CW role. It's got created. The permission I assigned is CloudWatch full access, so that is good. Let me go to my EC2 instance, and on this EC2 instance, I would go ahead and say, hey, I want to change, attach, or replace IAM role. Now, question to you again. Can I attach multiple IAM role to a EC2 instance? Multiple IAM role to a EC2 instance. Is it possible? Multiple IAM role. I'm getting yes and no. Answer for that is no. Single role. What would happen? Role would be one, and that would have multiple policies in that. So that is possible, but not multiple role. Remember my example of hat. You can wear one hat at a time on your head. That is your role. So, but that hat may have multiple things inside. That's not a problem. So that role can have multiple policies attached, but only one role can be associated with that instance. So I am selecting this particular role and I say apply. So now my role has been associated. It may take few seconds probably to stand and check whether my information has been rolled out or not. Let's go back to that instance, run the same command. Previously we got an error. Now this time let's run it. See this. What it says this time, trying default IAM role. It is using the role we just assigned, and it talked to this endpoint which is in EUS1, which is for CloudWatch, and it has started sending information like this. But it says verification completed successfully. No actual metrics was sent. Why? Because I said, hey, just verify. I don't need data right now to be sent. I just verified whether I have the best information or not, whether I have required permission or not. So I am able to see that yes, my information can be reaching out to the CloudWatch. And now, next thing I would be doing, I would now actually start sending metrics without saying verify. So let me clear this out and run another command. This time I am running the same command monitor put instance, and I'm saying report three things: memory utilization, memory used, and memory available of my EC2 instance. So this information I have started putting in. It says successfully reported this matrix. Now, what I did, it was a one time information sent from my agent to CloudWatch service. If I do it again, this is second time. If I do it again, this is third time. Obviously, I can't keep on doing this thing manually. I need a better approach. Any suggestions here? What can I do to automate sending this information to CloudWatch service? What could be your suggestion if I want to execute the script again and again? What I should be doing? Anyone? Cron job, yes, exactly. So we could put a cron job entry, and that cron job would take care of setting this data on a multiple times. So we would be doing the same thing. We would go ahead and say, hey, let's go ahead and utilize cron job. So I'm assuming a super user admin role here. Now, once I'm inside, I will go ahead and check the cron tab file, which is basically the automation. And in that, I could put entries like this. The entries in cron tab is in the format which is like minute, hour, and all the stuff. So in this case, I am going to insert one line, and that line is about this. So I am saying I want to run the script and report these metrics as a root user and in every 1 minute interval. So I have installed this information, and now this is part of my cron tab. So every 1 minute this information would start being displayed into, or this script would run and it would report back information to my CloudWatch service, and we could see that into the dashboard. So if you now go to CloudWatch management, because I started sending custom metrics, I should start seeing additional information. Let me go back to CloudWatch and I'll show you how the custom namespace would be displayed. Custom metrics, once you start displaying, they are displayed into something called custom namespace. I'll quickly show you it here, and you could plot a graph from that. So this is my metrics. I don't want this one right now. I am interested into browsing all available metrics, not only in EC2. I am saying all. I'm coming back to it. See this. See this one, custom namespace. So custom namespace, this I use a data brew job from Glue. That's why it reported. And this is the Linux metrics which I am displaying. And what this metrics contain, it is coming from instance. And which instance? Obviously, it would have name of my instance. And it is reporting three information: memory available, memory utilization, and memory used. And I could select it, and they would be displayed to me here into a graph format. So give it some time, it would start displaying me data in this location, right? So that's how I start sending information to CloudWatch. Now I just captured memory information. You could be creative and you could get other information from operating system and push that data to it, right? Agent is a Linux or Windows based service. So install it on premises, add your credential, and your on-premises information can also be displayed into one single place. So idea here is you could go ahead and say, I want to have one dashboard in which all my data from on-prem as well as from AWS would be displayed. So that should not be a problem. So it's really easy to get started with your CloudWatch services. Okay, hopefully everyone has understood and got an idea. So cron job can work, and you could go ahead and run your services from there, and your metrics would start collecting. If you want to create your own dashboard, we give you that option. Here I can create a custom dashboard. Let's say I'm using it for monitoring my servers, and in that monitoring my servers, I need to probably not use spaces. And here I could say what metrics I want to monitor. So I can add a widget. Widget could be like in this form of a graph. So I say, okay, line graph. I am looking for metrics information, and what metrics information. You could then select the specific metrics. Like here, I have these instance, and I could have selected their metrics data to be added, and this would start displaying a widget for me here like this. See this? See, we started getting some information. It will take little time, but if you look at these dots, this dot is representing, hey, what was the memory available? And then it would start sending this information again. So that's what we can check from your memory utilization on CloudWatch. Right, good. Okay, let's move forward. Let's talk a little bit more on other services. So this script would be available, play around if you want to. I have run these command which has given me access to this application, and I have put this all information here so you could leverage it. Should not be a problem at all on that, right? So detailed CloudWatch monitoring is using the same concept as enhanced monitoring. Enhanced monitoring, I'm not sure whether it's a correct word or not, so I have to check that. But detailed monitoring is basically I want granularity of 1 minute rather than standard, which is 5 minutes, right? So we need that. And whenever you are looking for custom data, that time you would need an agent to be installed. From there you would capture information. Okay, good. Okay, so that was quick refresher on CloudWatch. Now I'm moving to another service which is called Amazon Auto Scaling, Amazon EC2 Auto Scaling. So people get confused with the name. We have three auto scaling services and they are working differently. They have their own use cases. Let me focus on first writing down those names. So first commonly used is what we call Amazon EC2 Auto Scaling. That is the most common one. Then we have AWS Auto Scaling. And then we have AWS Application Auto Scaling. They have different purposes. They work differently. The concept is same, adding capacity when you need and removing capacity when you don't need. So concept is same, but the scope of those services are different. Like when I'm using AWS Auto Scaling, I could include multiple services inside like EC2, DynamoDB, and other services. So that's possible. Application auto scaling, I would be focusing purely based on application data. What I am focusing today is Amazon EC2 auto scaling. Idea here is based on my requirement, I would add capacity for EC2 or I would remove capacity from those EC2 instances. So I would be scaling out or scaling in based on this particular service, which is called Amazon or EC2 auto scaling. Okay, so we are trying to scale our services depending on the metrics. Let's see this picture thing in action. Now, auto scaling as a service can be used independently. Means I could just create an auto scaling group and work from there, should not be a problem. But most of the time, what you would find that it would make sense if you combine this auto scaling service with other services as well. Let me explain that. Let's say what I could do, I could have a load balancer. You know what load balancers, right? Load balancer distribute traffic as the request comes in. I could put load balancer in front, and behind it as a target I could have auto scaling group, and in this auto scaling group I could define minimum number of instances and maximum number of instances which I want to use. So this minimum and maximum number of instances, once I start, minimum is 2. So auto scaling group would create a set of 2 instances for me and make them part of this auto scaling group because we have added it as a minimum required, right? So load balancer is an independent service. It can work independently. Auto scaling is an independent service, but most of the time you would see customers combine it because that makes sense to distribute your traffic using that pattern. So what I would have now, my users would be coming to my load balancer as a front end, and then we would be coming in. What is the difference between minimum versus desired? We will talk about Debashis. Hold on to that question. We'll discuss on that. So users are sending requests to my EC Elastic Load Balancer here. Now, For monitoring, we need to have a service called CloudWatch, which we just discussed. CloudWatch can collect metrics from different places. CloudWatch can say, hey, send me information, load balancer, tell me what is your latency. Latency is basically when I am having a service, load balancer receives a request, send it to backend processes and responds back. Obviously, it would take some time. So that is the latency which my users would be seeing. So monitoring of latency from load balancer can be done by CloudWatch. Load balancer can report its latency metrics to CloudWatch and CloudWatch can track it. Similarly, I could have also configured to have metrics from my EC2 instances like average CPU utilization. And this could be also reported to my CloudWatch as a service, should not be a problem. Now, what CloudWatch is going to do, it would collect metrics and I could define some threshold here. Based on this threshold, it would go ahead and perform some action for me. So I may have seen that, hey, my average CPU utilization is going high, and in response to it, I want to trigger an alarm. So my threshold breached, maybe CPU utilization went 80%, alarm raised, and that alarm can be leveraged to talk to the service, which is called our auto scaling service. Right. So CloudWatch once receives an alert which says that, hey, there is something wrong. We have a lot of utilization of EC2 machine. We do not have enough capacity. Call more people to help us. CloudWatch will then say, okay, let me talk to auto scaling service. So three services are working here: load balancer, CloudWatch, and auto scaling. They could be independently working or they could combine here, like as we have seen here. So we are going to cover this information. So what happens now that this service is responding to CloudWatch auto EC2 auto scaling and say, hey, we do not have sufficient capacity. Can you add more member into the group so that we could handle the load which is coming up? Auto scaling would say, yes, I'm happy to do that, but I would need a template, because you have to tell me what size of EC2 you want. You have to tell me what operating system it would have, what software would be installed inside it. So I would be needing that information, and that information is captured into a component, which is what we call is a launch config. So launch config is basically your template which serves as a starting point for launching new instances into your auto scaling group. So that's what we are going to do. We need a template, and that template will be used as a base for launching new instances in my environment. That's what my auto scaling service is going to do. Okay, hopefully everyone is clear with that. So auto scaling will detect that, it will read the launch config, and based on that deploy one instance to me. And just deploying instance won't work. I have to inform load balancer also that, hey, load balancer, now you could send traffic to 3 instances rather than 2. So auto scaling would also report or notify load balancer that instance is healthy. Please go ahead and we can go ahead and send traffic to the available instance. Auto scaling can do its health check, and health check will ensure that only healthy instances are reported to auto scaling, and then only auto scaling would be sending information. So that is completing the whole cycle of my application request. And hopefully, once I have 3 instances, this red CPU utilization would be green or blue because we do not have that much of complications there. Right. So we will discuss this, how these all components work. I'll show you a quick demo and we can take it from there. We would be then moving forward and understanding all these things into action. And once that setup is running, I would talk about minimum, maximum, and all those kind of stuff. Right. So let me leverage the same instance which we have launched. This was the instance we launched, right? There is one instance we launched. That instance was running, and I am going to leverage the same instance. What I'm going to do here, just to make this thing easier for us, I want to run some load test on that. I want to artificially add CPU performance bottleneck here. And for that, I am going to add some script or add some tools or utility, and I would send this information into resources page. What I'm going to do, I'm installing some extra information, extra tool for running stress test. So I'm installing some extra packages here. That packages are required for a stress test tool to work. Once these packages are installed, I would then go ahead and say, hey, yes, and let me install the stress tool also. right? So this is clear, done. I would go ahead and say, yeah, now please go ahead and install the stress tool. So stress tool is just a utility I would use to run CPU stress there. Done. It is clear. Let me check CPU utilization. I could check it through uptime. So here you could say average CPU utilization is around 0.40 and something. So it's very, very less. Let me test if this tool is working fine or not. So I could go ahead and run this stress tool, which is my stress tool, and CPU 8 minus V8 timeout. That's what I'm doing here. So I'm running 8 thread on CPU and it is consuming a lot of CPU. Basically, it is hogging my CPU. So my CPU utilization is shooting up. I tested the tool. Yes, it is working fine. This is an example of you are building a master template. Whatever tools, whatever services you need, you could add those services into your primary template, and that template can become your starting point for remaining services. So my work here is done. I have added all the component I needed for it, and now what I'm going to do, I'm going to shut down this instance and I would capture its image, because launch config requires an image to get started, not a running instance. So first I would shut down this instance, and from that instance I would be capturing an image associated with it. So let me stop this instance first, right? Once this instance stops, it would be in pristine state, and from there I would capture a AMI, a machine image for it, and that would be used as a starting point for anything I want to launch for my additional services. Okay, hopefully everyone is following along. Let me quickly check questions. Okay, containers, little different question. We know it's not same concept. We will discuss it if the time permits. Maybe in next chapter I will talk a little bit on containers if the time permits. So I have stopped this instance. Now I would say, hey, I am looking for building an image. Let me create an image here. I would call it like it is my primary template, and this is having this information. I could give some description to image. That's fine. And that is a simulation of you would install your application and then capture a AMI associated with it, right? Can't we use launch template and create new launch config? See, these two are two different things, Venkatesh. Now, older concept is called launch config. So if you see this auto scaling feature here on EC2 console, there is a component which is called launch config. So you could use launch config if you want, no problem at all on that. Little old school, the newest method we have is what we call is a launch template. So launch template has some additional information inside it, because then you could use this launch template not only for your EC2, but when you have a spot fleet to launch, when you have a spot instances to run, launch template could be used there. So launch template makes your template independent of auto scaling. If you have used launch config scope is only within auto scaling. So that's the difference, but it depends what your use case is. Right, so I would use here launch config. It's easy to get started with, but you could have used anything else. It should not be a problem at all. No issues on that. Let me verify whether my AMI is ready or not, whether my image got ready or not. So I'm checking here in AMIs, and if you could see, this image is still getting ready. Let me give it a name, give it few seconds, and from pending, it would come to ready state, and then I should be able to leverage that particular instance if I want to, right? So what would be the process for it? The process would be very simple. I would go to my launch config and I would say, hey, I want to create a launch configuration. Let's give it few names, some more information. Let's call it my BeSA launch config. Probably I should not give spaces. Which AMI to use? So I would select the AMIs which are available in my account. I could see them. See this? This is my all the AMIs which I have, and this one was my primary template which I was looking for. So no AMIs found. Give it few seconds, and it would be ready, and then we should be able to leverage that AMI. So let's say this is my primary template. So I'm using that. Instance type. I could select what would be my instance type associated with it. So I'm creating a launch config, and I can say auto scaling group. Whenever you add more capacity, what you should do, you should go ahead and add this type of instances which I'm asking you to add, and I could select them. So give it few seconds, it would come. Another thing, if you see here, I could go ahead and say, I want my spot instances also to be part of it. So that is not at all a problem. So I could go ahead and add instance types. Now I'm not sure why it is not responding. Give it few seconds, please. Nope. Let's exit the page, come back again. Probably it was not able to detect the primary template because it was still into the process of getting ready. So we'll try it again. And once that process starts, lack of caffeine, yes, I always need that. Zeb, thanks for that. Not me, but my system. Okay, so let's see that. And we will be leveraging that time when instances get start for a break. So hold on with me for 5 more minutes. We would launch the EC2 machine, and from there we would get started and add more capacity. So let me open it in another location. Okay, good. Okay, so EC2 is ready. Let me go back to EC2 and say, hey, I want to have a launch config. Let me go to add that launch config here. So I'm creating a launch config. Let's hope this time it works. So BeSA launch config is fine. I would select the AMI which I'm interested in. Choose instance type first. That's okay. That's very weird, isn't it? Yep. Still the same. Yeah, this is working fine now. So let me say t2.micro. You could select different instance types also. I'll talk about that, how you could diversify your workload. But for simplicity, I'm using only one instance type as of now here. Come on. Nope. I'll give it a few more seconds for it to respond, or let's see how the browser runs. Uh, I don't want to show everything from command line because it would confuse lot of people. But so let's wait for it, and we will come back and we will get started with that. So let's give it a few more seconds. Hopefully it would be then ready, and we should be able to then leverage it. So this console has crashed. That is done. Let me close that while creating launch config. This one is acting weird. This one is also not responding. Let me refresh it again. Yep. Okay. So let me first choose an AMI. I would start launch config again, and I would hopefully this time should be successful. Can we mix instance type? Absolutely, you can. Not in launch config, but in launch template, that option is available. So that newer feature in a way is available on launch template. See this, instead of using launch config, we recommend using launch template. So that's fine. We will see that. So let's see LC01 launch config 01, and let me select the AMIs. This is my primary template which we had. What else is there? Then we are selecting instance type. So let's select instance type here. Hopefully this time it will give me list of instances. Yeah, we can take break, but I want to leverage that time because the instance itself will take little time to get ready. So we will take break in a minute. Let me type things very carefully and be little more patient here. It would come up. See, most of the time you would be using script or cloud formation. So manually doing things are not always the best approach. Probably you would have automation done using cloud formation or Terraform or tool of your choice, or maybe just the Python program who would go ahead and launch all these services for. So you should not be a problem. So this time it's fine. We selected t2.micro here. And in this, I could, if you want, you could use spot instances. You could associate a IAM profile also, because these instances would need to report something back if you require. You could add that, and you could add storage and security group information. I am using SSH from anywhere, that's fine. Key pair information. So I would obviously use a key pair, which is jump box, because I want to run something on that. And I say, yes, I am happy, and I am creating a launch config. So I am starting up a launch config. This is the base for my auto scaling group. Once my launch config is ready, I would leverage that into a auto scaling group. So let me launch auto scaling group, and then we will go for a short break. So this is my auto scaling group option. Not a very complicated setting, very easy to get started. What I'm looking for, I am creating a auto scaling group. Let's call it BeSA ASG launch template or launch config. See this, you could have used both. I am switching to launch config, and this is my launch config 01. And in this, I have options to select which VPC it would launch into. I could say that I want to spread my application across multiple subnet. So you could add that. It would give little more high availability for your application. And what else you could do? You could go ahead and skip and review, or you could follow some more instruction like, hey, do you need a load balancer? So it can add it for you. Do you want to perform a health check, and how much time you want for that health check? That you could add. Additional metrics collected from auto CloudWatch or not. So you could select have that too. Here is my option for desired capacity, minimum capacity, and maximum capacity. I'll explain them, but let me put right now some values and let it be ready, and I'll explain it little later what these settings are. So desired, minimum, and maximum, and I could say what my scaling policies are. I haven't set any policy, but let me say I am using a target tracking based policy. I'll explain policy also, so don't worry. I'm right now tracking 50% CPU utilization. It happens, it should trigger the policy. So this is for my scale out. I may want to scale in also. So we'll discuss scale in, scale out options in a minute. I have set the policy. I want to notify someone when auto scaling happens. So I could notify those person specifically from here. I could add tags so I could identify these instances. And once I'm happy, my auto scaling group is getting ready. I start creating an auto scaling group here. As the minimum configuration was 2, what is going to happen? This auto scaling group is going to add 2 instances for me, and that would be visible in a minute here that, hey, it is updating and it has started launching 2 EC2 instances. If you go back to EC2 dashboard, you should be seeing those 2 instances getting ready for you. It may take little while, but it should be visible that, hey, we are now starting 2 EC2 instances for you, because the minimum value you asked for us was a minimum 2. So right, let me remove this running from here, and you could see these 2 instances are getting started. And if you see, they are being spread on multiple availability zone. Why? Because it would ensure that one of them fails, other would still survive if the availability zone is completely down. So give it few seconds. Let's leverage this time for a break. Once we return, we will then discuss more interesting stuff. I'll talk about some auto scaling policy, and I'll share an example of how Netflix uses auto scaling for their advantages. So please give us, all of us, 5 minutes. We'll maybe top up our coffee, and then we will be ready to answer your question. So we start back in 5 minutes. Thank you. All right. I hope everyone is back. If you're back, confirm in chat and we will get started. If everyone is back. Good. Thank you. Let's move forward and let's see what auto scaling has done for us so far. So hopefully now my instances have been running. As you could see, they just started. Based on network, they would be spread across availability zone and may have public IP. It all depends. But my auto scaling group has created 2 instances for me. And let's see what is the current status of it. Good part is everything auto scaling is doing for us, it is being recorded as an event, and I could go and explore those events like what it has done for me. So here is my auto scaling group. It is showing me minimum, desired, maximum, details of it, Amazon resource name so that I could access it programmatically. And here is the launch config I have used, what was the instance type, which network it belonged to, load balancer, health check, any advanced configuration, all these. This is of importance to me, call activity. In activity, it would tell me, hey, what I have done so far. If it is waiting for some notification, it would show it here. And it says, for now, I have launched 2 instances for you. Why I have done that? Because you have created a group, and that was a difference between desired and actual capacity, increasing the capacity from 0 to 2. So initially it was 0 capacity, and now it has created 2 instances. So it has increased capacity to 2. And in response to that event, it has launched 2 EC2 machine for me. Right. So that's how auto scaling is actually working. If you remember, I have configured that I want to perform some scaling. Let's see what scaling policy I have. So I'm going to this automatic scaling. Right. So here I have a target tracking policy which says as required to maintain average CPU utilization is 50. So if CPU utilization goes beyond 50, what it would start doing, it would start adding more instances in my environment. So let's artificially trigger CPU spike. I would go to these instances and run that stress tool which we have installed. As it was installed in the AMI itself, I am able to access these instances and trigger it. So I would just connect to these instances through their public IPs and launch that stress tool in them. So copy this, and I would use again putty to connect to these instances. I'm just simulating. In real life, this would be happening because of your application load becoming higher, or maybe some activity happening in your environment. So I'm trying to simulate this connection here. I'm not sure about the security group setting, but hopefully you get the idea that how all these things would be working, right? So we will see that in a minute. Okay, give me one more minute. I'll try to see why I am not able to SSH into this machine. I'm not sure if I remembered by selecting that auto scaling group AMI or not, the PEM file associated with that, but that's fine. Let me try to connect it manually from here. Session manager, nope. EC2 instance connect, root is EC2-user, and let's try to connect from here. I'm trying to connect it through browser. No, that's fine. Now let me explain a little bit more on auto scaling group without going inside the details of it. What are the settings here? Let me talk about that. So first setting we have is a minimum, maximum, and desired. Minimum and maximum should be clear to most of us. Most complicated to understand or highly misunderstood is desired. Let me try to explain. Let's say I do not have desired. Just giving an example. Let's say we do not have the setting. We have only setting for minimum and we have setting for maximum. Now, if I have set to 2 and set it to 10, how I would know how many I have to launch? I have started with minimum 2. If now I say, hey, I need 4 instances. So if I go and modify this to 4, later somebody comes in and checks what is the minimum instance, it would say 4. So they would be not removing the remaining 2. So if we do not have desired, then there is no idea that what is the current capacity and what is the minimum capacity. Because if you just keep on increasing minimum, then it becomes a permanent kind of a fixture in your environment. So what you would be doing, you would say, hey, minimum is 2. This is my auto scaling group. Minimum is 2. Maximum is 10. And my current is what? Current is defined by desired. So if I am saying I want on this minimum to maximum 10 group 5 instances. So I would go ahead and modify the desired setting. Either I could go ahead and manually modify that setting, or it could be an alert who could modify that setting. So actions, when they have to be taken into account, whenever something has to be added, we don't want to touch minimum, we won't want to touch maximum, and that's why we touch what? We touch desired, and we change its capacity. So desired is what we plan to do. Nothing is impossible. We plan to have desired, but there are chances that sometime we may not be able to meet desired. There are some corner case scenario. So that is possible. But we plan to have, this is, I am desiring to become, like I am trying to become like 5 instance or 10 instance, whatever it is. So desired is your moving factor which would keep on adding, removing. We don't want to touch minimum and maximum. What we would touch on, we would always touch on desired. So desired is your current state of your auto scaling group, and whenever somebody is manually or automatically changing something, that is changing desired value, right? One more use case. Let's say I have an auto scaling group. I want to have minimum 2, maximum 10, but right now I want to launch it with 6 for testing purpose right now. So how I make changes? If I make changes into minimum, it would become a permanent setting. So instead of that, I can say, hey, right now means let's change its a desired setting. And now I am able to access that instance. That is possible. So that's how I would be changing the desired setting. So desired is what is currently happening, what minimum and maximum are. They are static. They won't change unless you do it. So that is possible. So hopefully this desired is clear. Now, what I could also do, I could have different instance types in that. I could say, hey, what I'm looking for, I am looking for some T2, I am looking for some C5, I am looking some R5. So I could combine all of them into one auto scaling group. So that is also possible. So we could do that. Plus, you could have different billing family. What does it mean? You may have a auto scaling group, which I want auto scaling group. I want you to have 100 instances, but 20 I want from on demand or my reserved instance capacity, and 80 I want you from spot instances. So what you could do, you could add this kind of combination within your auto scaling group for different billing families. Should not be a problem at all. So that's true. And as I explained you, we could launch it across availability zone. So you could run it across availability zone without having any issue. So these are some of the common settings which we have, right? What kind of tool I use for writing? This is a tool called Epic Pen. So if you heard about it, this tool is called Epic Pen. This is available for Mac also now. So I use this tool called Epic Pen to draw and write. Okay. Now, what else can be done? So what was the process of launching auto scaling? Create a base or golden template, as we call it. Create a launch configuration and configure your auto scaling group. That's what we have used so far for configuring auto scaling. Now, there are some policies which you could leverage with your auto scaling group, and that's what I want to explain further. So my auto scaling group is ready, and I want to now talk about some of the policies which can be used to trigger auto scaling when I would add capacity, when I would not add capacity or remove capacity. I could go ahead and make changes. So let's see, go ahead and edit it. So I'm editing my auto scaling group. I would be able to change capacity here, minimum desired, launch config, all these settings, health check, advanced configuration. And here I could have my termination policy, or I could have additional policy for launching my machine. So that is possible. I could add some policies here if the need be. So now when I'm deleting the instances, what would be my strategy? If the time permits, I will talk about that. But let me right now focus on what are the common auto scaling policies you could use. So there are 4. Manual scaling, right? If I manually want to go and install something, I know that, hey, my QA has just started a testing, and for that, I want to be ready and let me go ahead and manually change something. So when you say I want to do manual scaling, that time what you are basically doing, you are changing your desired capacity. That is a manual scaling. Pretty easy to get started. Just change your manual scaling, and you would have that much number of instances. Whatever you want should not be a problem. So that is your desired capacity. Manual scaling, manually going and changing it. Why I would do it? Probably I know, hey, today is what we are going with the testing and we require 10 instances. Let me go and manually change it. I don't want to wait for CPU to bump up and then auto scaling to kick in. I want to be upfront ready for that. That is manual scaling. Second is scheduled scaling, not a very complicated one. If you know you do a payroll processing system and that always requires of capacity at the last day of the month, I could put a schedule. So I don't have to manually look for it. It can automatically pick up the schedule, and on that schedule would be able to go ahead and utilize it. So manual scaling is good when somebody asks you, hey, there is a problem, please add capacity. Manual intervention required, manual scaling is good. Scheduled, when you know about these things upfront. I know that I am going for vacation or there is a company wide shutdown for Christmas holidays. So I could say, please scale down and make my minimum to 2. I don't want more than that. So that is where I would be saying. So if you know about the event upfront, or if it is a regular event which is happening, probably that time scheduled scaling would be a best use case for you. So you could use scheduled scaling in that case, right? So hopefully this one is clear. Now, what else? I have explained you that, sorry, uh, there is an option for you to utilize something called, give me a minute, let me go back here. In scheduled scaling, manual scaling. Now, in dynamic scaling, we have multiple ways. Dynamic scaling can be based on a threshold. We will talk about what a threshold is. Or dynamic scaling based on could be target tracking. So I'll explain both the policies to you, that how we could meet based on threshold, or how we could meet based on target tracking. We will be talking about that. Let's go ahead and discuss these things. So scheduled scaling hopefully is clear. What I'm talking right now, dynamic scaling with target tracking. Pay attention. This is a little graph which I want to show you, and it would help you in understanding better. Now, to give an example, like I have to give always, anybody drives a car with cruise control. Anyone? Anyone drives a car with cruise control? If you do, what is the advantage of cruise control? Anyone? What is the advantage of using cruise control? Why in cars you would have cruise control? Or simple example, we all have air conditioning, and that air conditioning will be having a thermostat. This thermostat would be monitoring the temperature. It's kind of autopilot. It automates driving, consistent speed. So not automate driving, I would say it is a consistent speed thing. So when you put cruise control and you said, hey, I want a cruise control with the speed of 40. What cruise control will do, it would ensure that, let's say you are going on a slope and your car speed is increasing. So I'm not the best driver for cars, but let's say this is your car and it's going downhill and its speed is increasing because of gravity. So it would ensure that it makes your car again into steady state of 40. So that is what a cruise control is. Or simplest would be thermostat. Thermostat in your house, if I set it to 24 degrees, if my temperature goes up, it would cool it down. And if it has facility, if it goes down, it would then heat it up and maintain a steady state performance of 24 degree for me. So that's how we would be using it. Good on highway, go to 120. Could be, it depends. If you are in that place, yes, highway 120 is possible, but I would still not put 120. It's a little too much for me. All right, now let me give a technical context here. What I have said here, hey, I want to set up a average CPU utilization. I want to monitor CPU. And if you look at this graph, this thing here is says my target utilization. Maybe I have application. That application works best when I have less than 50% CPU utilization. Maybe it is designed like that. If your CPU is below 50%, it gives you optimal performance. It gives you best performance. So my target is I don't want ever to go beyond 50. Okay, so what I did here, if you see this line here, this pink one, this says target utilization, and I have set it to 50% target utilization, that I want to go maximum up to 50% utilization of my EC2 instance CPU, nothing beyond it. So what can be done for that? So I have set a target. Now let's see what is currently happening. Two graphs are there, so pay attention. This graph below is for your traffic over time, and this graph here is your CPU with number of instances. And here three metrics are there. The green line is representing your number of instances. So if you see this, number of instances are currently 10. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And this is the traffic which is coming in. We expect and set target tracking here 50%. Now what happens? Let's see. Let's say due to whatever reason, we have more traffic coming into application. So what we did here, we had more traffic. Question to you, if more traffic comes in, My CPU utilization currently, which is below 50, this blue lines which you could see here, what would happen to my CPU utilization if I have more traffic coming into my application? Would it increase or would it decrease? What would happen? Anyone? What would happen if I have more traffic coming into my application now? Will it have increasing traffic on CPU? Obviously, yes. So what happens as soon as my traffic comes in? What is going to happen? I would be seeing more traffic coming to application, and that would mean my CPU utilization is also increased. So let's say now what happened from 50% or 45, 50% utilization, I am now reaching out to be somewhere on 75. Is it a good condition? Not a good condition because I said I want to always remain less than 50%. So what auto scaling will do? Auto scaling will find out, okay, you have reached beyond 70, beyond what the threshold we have put. Threshold was 50%, you are beyond it. What can we do so that you come back again and remain with us? That's what we are looking for. So what we want here, as soon as my CPU utilization goes up, I could see this blue line here, auto scaling will kick in. It will find out, hey, how much is the breach? Breach is like 25%. How many instances we can add so that we could remove that problem? So what we would do in that case, we means auto scaling. Auto scaling will increase your number of instances. We had 10 instances, it would add more instances so that we would be able to handle the extra load which has come to my environment. So what I'm going to do now, I am going to add more instances. So number of instances has increased from 10 to 15, and hopefully once they have reached to 15, it would bring down my utilization again to below what I was expecting. So my utilization is again going. So it would identify when your utilization is going up, and based on that, it would add capacity or remove capacity to keep you within that tracked limit. That's what we are doing as a target tracking. So we set a target and let auto scaling Europe handle that target. Like in your cruise control, you set a target for a speed, or in thermostat, you set a target for temperature, and let the system handle when to add, when to remove, when to heat up, when to cool down. That's what exactly is the target tracking. Everyone okay so far? Right. Now, does it mean that we always have to doesn't that have contradict the minimum and maximum desired? No. See, desired would keep on changing. Minimum won't be there. Minimum will never be touched. So even if I am not having that much utilization, but if our minimum is 10, it would always keep 10. It would never scale down below 10. So minimum would never be breached and maximum will never be breached, because what could happen? Let's say this was an attack on your application. Your utilization keeps on increasing and increasing. Does it mean that I have to keep on adding up to infinity instances? Who would pay for it? So we don't want to pay for infinity, and that's why we always put a maximum threshold. Hey, come what may, I can't give beyond that because that would have an impact on my billing. So I can't go beyond it. That is maximum. And minimum, come what may, I always want to keep two running. Whether somebody is using it or not doesn't matter, but I'd never want to go below two. So that is minimum and maximum, right? Hopefully this is clear. So maximum is always required. You cannot create auto scaling group without minimum and maximum. Okay. Now, next thing, do I always have to rely on metrics which is reported by CloudWatch? In a way, yes. In a way, no. What if, let me give you an example. Let's say I am running a Uber-like system, Uber taxis. I predict or I talk to a weather website. I means my system, and that weather website reports back to me what is the probability of rain. So if probability of rain is more than 80% that evening, I would prefer that because of this, more people would be interested to hire taxis because they don't want to get drenched into rain. So I could check a data from weather station, and if says probability of rain is 80%, I could use this as a trigger for my auto scaling. And when this probability is higher, probably I would need more instances at the back end to handle the load which will be increased. And when this weather station says, hey, probability of rain is 30% or less, I could say, okay, let me remove those instances. So you could use some third party factors also through CloudWatch to be a trigger point for you. Should not be a problem at all. So that is completely possible. right? So pretty flexible service, and you can use very innovative use cases with it. Should not be a problem. Hopefully everyone is clear. Now, this was target tracking. Another policy we support inside this is called dynamic scaling with step scaling. How we do step scaling, let me again explain you by an example. I lived in Dubai for a long time, and one night I reached home from somewhere and I found that a nearby building was having a fire. There was a fire going on, that was a restaurant, and there was a fire. I called the fire department and they asked me a weird question. They asked me a question. They asked me, say, hey, tell us how big is the fire? Now, I have no idea how to define a fire or how to monitor fire. It should be meter, centimeter, kilometer, how I should say what the size of the fire is. So that was a little weird question for me to answer because I didn't have an idea that how to monitor fire or how to say how big is the fire. So question they asked me is that how big is the fire? I didn't realize what they mean by that. Then they explained me and I was making that call first time, but they get these call every day. So then they started telling me, hey, tell us whether it is a room on the fire or tell us whether it is a whole apartment on fire. Yeah, give me a minute. Whole apartment is on fire or is it the whole building on the fire? Then I realized that hey, they are trying to understand how big the fire is so they would know how many resources they have to send. If I said a room is on fire, probably they will send one vehicle, two or 10 men, and they would take care of that fire. But if I said the whole building is on fire, and Dubai buildings are like 40 story, 30 story sometimes. So that would be like all hands on deck position. Everyone has to be sent to that fire because there is a huge manpower required for it. So bigger the breach, more resources is required. Smaller the breach, less resources is required. That is what we mean by step scaling. Let me explain this information here into this format. See this one. What I am seeing here, I am seeing here step scaling. So I say if my CPU utilization goes from 50 to 60, add two instances. If this goes from 60 to 70, add four instances. And if it goes beyond 70, means I have a bigger breach. I want more instances to be added in this particular case. So bigger the breach, more number of instances has to be added. And that is also be possible through step scaling. So it depends on what policy you prefer. And it's not like either or policy. I could always have manual scaling. I could put schedule also, and I could track through dynamic tracking also. So these all policy work will with each other. They are not competing with each other. So they would be taking care of the way I want to run my auto scaling group. So this is the third type of policy, which is called step scaling or desired scaling, right? What is the last one? Last one is predictive scaling. This is little more newer policy than what we have discussed so far. Let me quickly talk about what we have discussed so far, and I'll go back to that slide. So we discuss about these three policies. If you look at manual, scheduled, and dynamic, these three are reactive policies. If this happens, I'll do that. If that happens, I'll do this. So they are all reacting. Manual, scheduled, and scaling, they are reacting. What if I can become little smart and be proactive? So that proactive scaling is called my predictive scaling. Let me explain what is predictive scaling and how it works. What predictive scaling is doing, it is keeping track of your previous history. It tracks your last 14 days utilization and based on that predicts when you may need more capacity to handle the workload which is coming up. Let me explain this thing here. See this. Without predictive scaling, what happens? This white line is my CPU utilization. So CPU utilization goes up. Okay, I would handle it by adding more instances. CPU utilization goes up again, I would add more instances. So in this time when instances are getting ready, my customers are still facing bad performance because instances may take little time to get ready. What if I could make my system smart and it captures my 14 days of data and based on that says when I would be needing more capacity and be upfront ready for that particular workload. As you could see here, what is happening, I anticipate my CPU would go high. Before that we added capacity again, we were anticipating, we added capacity again and again and again. So this is becoming a predictive scaling. It is machine learning based model which detects your behavior from past days, and based on that it is able to predict what is going to happen. That's what we call a predictive scaling. So it's a good thing, and you could leverage it to get better benefit for scaling policy. So it is your decision how you want to leverage these specific services. All right, so that's how you would be able to utilize it. Can this 14 be configurable? I don't know what we mean by 14. No, 14 is not configurable. The number of days, no. Right now, the model predicts based on 14 only, not beyond it. So it won't be capturing your monthly cycles. It may be for weekly. For monthly cycle, I would say use your scheduled scaling. Now, a quick use case about Netflix. Probably everyone knows about Netflix, right? So this data which I'm sharing is from 2018. So it was obviously would have changed by now, but just it is a good example to see. So Netflix that time had 137 million subscribers, 190 plus countries, and they are supporting their service on 1700 devices plus devices, Apple iPhone, mobile devices, then maybe laptop, desktop, kiosk, smart TV, all these places. And how they leverage AWS, they were leveraging three AWS regions, and see the number, 250,000 reserved instances. These mini EC2 machines they were running, and they have put them together into 20,000 auto scaling group. What you see here at the bottom are two pictures, two videos. One on the left is little dark, one on the right is little much better picture. Why it happens? Netflix detects your network quality, and based on that streams a lower value output or a high definition output to you. So it depends on how much network capacity you have, how your network is performing. It would be able to add capacity, add better video, or remove some pixels and give you a less quality video, because continuity is more important than quality in streaming. So that's how Netflix is using this mechanism of identifying bandwidth and then deliver that type of video to the customer. And for that, they need capacity. So how they use this 250,000 instances, this is their regular streaming traffic. This is mostly driven by US, I would say. If you see here, around 7 p.m. every day, this is data from 2018, people come home, they have dinner, and now they are watching something before going to bed. So around 7 p.m., they always had peak. See this. Every day, around 7 p.m., they get peak utilization of their services. So that is what is happening. And once people sleep around 3 a.m., what is happening, as you could see here, around 3 a.m., they have the least utilization. 7 p.m., they have highest utilization. So their capacity is like this, which means their capacity is maximum utilized on 7 p.m. and remaining capacity is free till 3 p.m. So what they do in that case? What they do smart mechanism here through auto scaling. They use this capacity which gets free to encoding job, because they have to encode their video for different video format, different monitoring station. So this is how they are scaling their environment and adding capacity back to streaming. Once capacity becomes free, they add it to encoding and bring it back to their regular streaming job. So all automated, using 20,000 auto scaling group and delivering the performance which customers are expecting from it. So this is just a use case. I'll send you a link in resource page today where you can get more detail on how they implemented, what metrics they are monitoring, and how they run that massive global scale infrastructure. All right, so that was all on auto scaling. Probably it has given you good idea on how it works. Now let's go ahead and extend this to little more observability discussion. And this time I would ask James to help us in understanding what are the three pillars of observability. And then we will talk through star model, and Jamila would help us in that case. So I'm adding James into the screen and he would get started. Over to you, James. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. So yeah, as Ashish said, I wanted to kind of extend what Ashish has been talking about around monitoring. So monitoring is obviously mechanisms that you can put in place to be able to look at what's happening in your system. Whereas the difference with observability is if there's a problem, or if you want to go in and debug your system or look at a problem within your system, that's where observability comes in. So the two are very, very linked. They're very similar, but one is more about actively monitoring and seeing what's going on, and observability is more about debugging. And when it comes to observability, there's three key pillars that I normally like to talk to people about. And they are metrics, which Ash has already covered in quite a lot of detail today. There's logs, which are written pieces of information that may come out of your application. And then there's traces, and I'll come on to traces in a little more detail when I get to that. And these are the three things that you likely need to get a good observability strategy for your application. So to start with metrics very quickly, because Shisha's already covered this in quite a lot of detail, but you've got infrastructure metrics that you can get out of AWS. So things like CPU utilization, your disk space, your network traffic, the number of connections to your databases maybe. And these are all really useful metrics to do things like auto scaling. So if your servers are under a lot of load, you can add additional EC2 instances. The same for databases or for maybe queues. You can scale up your infrastructure or your application based on these metrics. So they're really useful. But there's another type of metric that I think are also equally useful. And these are metrics that are specific to your application. And I'll tell you why. If you released a new version of your application to one of your EC2 instances, for example, and that introduced a problem into your application. Now, if there was a problem in your application, things like your CPU utilization, your disk space, your network traffic might be really low. So that may not necessarily trigger any infrastructure metrics or any infrastructure alarms. But if all of a sudden let's say it's an e-commerce application, you stop getting orders received and orders stop getting placed, well, you could then use that to notify you that there is a problem, something's happened, something's changed, your average usage. If you think of the Netflix graph that Ashish just showed, if all of a sudden at 7 p.m. there was no traffic, that would then indicate that there may be a problem. So having metrics that are specific to your application are also really useful. And things like feature usage are also incredibly useful. So if you build a new feature for an application, you want to understand if customers are actually using that feature. And then when you know which features are being used and which ones aren't, you can then choose where to focus your development effort to provide the most value to your customers. So that's the important thing with metrics. You've got infrastructure metrics, which are incredibly useful, but it's also worth thinking about what metrics are important to your business, to your application, and how can they be used to help monitor your system. So moving on to logs now. So logs are written pieces of information that may come out of your application that you can use to help identify errors or troubleshoot errors. And at least when I first started working in software, I used to write log messages that look something like this. So I'd be building something on my laptop, I'd be writing messages, I'd be reading the message and say, yes, everything works great. This is all looking fantastic. But once you then run that in production, and let's say this is, again, an e-commerce application, and now let's say there's requests, I make a request, but also Jamila's trying to do something at the same time. Now, looking at these log messages now, there's no way I can identify which log messages are for which person. It's all just kind of merged into one, like which database storage is mine, which is for Jamila's request. So if I was coming in to try and look at this now and work out what was happening, let's say there was a problem with Jamila's order, I wouldn't know which messages to look at. And I made this mistake for many years of just writing messages out and then coming to debug it and it being really challenging. So when it comes to logs, one thing we would always recommend people do is use some kind of structured format to your logs. So instead of just writing out a message, write it out in a format that is standardized and the same across all of your log messages. And the benefit of this now is that you can now identify which messages are for my request and which messages are for Jamila's request. And I'll go into more detail on this when I actually go into the AWS console in just a moment. But this now makes it really easy, if there was an issue, for me to come back and look at exactly what happened with either my order or Jamila's order. And that leads quite nicely onto traces. So traces are about passing a common identifier between the different parts of your application to be able to do things like that and group your logs together to identify which logs are for the same request. Now, traces do become more important when you start to build larger, more distributed systems. And we're going to talk about microservices and serverless next week. But how a trace will work, that if a request comes into a service in your application, that first service will generate some kind of identifier. But that service may return back to the person who made the request, but there may be other things that happen behind the scenes. So if you imagine when you place an order on Amazon.com, you place the order on the website, you get an order confirmed, that's great. But then there's other things that then happen behind the scenes that you don't see. So like the order getting shipped, your payment getting processed. These are all other things that happen behind the scenes after you've actually confirmed your order and you've gone away. So if you were trying to work out what had happened in Amazon.com, you'd need this common identifier. So the trace may get generated at first, and then that trace may be passed back to the user or the web browser that made the request. But then that same trace identifier would then be passed between all of the other parts of the application. That means that when you come to look at your logs, you can then look at your logs across all of your services, and there's a common identifier across all of them. So again, if you imagine with the Amazon example, let's say there's a problem with the payment, you could then relate the payment to the shipping to the actual original order that came in when you actually look at your log messages. So they're the three parts of observability: logs, metrics, and traces. Now, what I'm going to do now, hopefully, is just go into the AWS console and show you how you can look at both logs, metrics, and traces in the console. So CloudWatch, as she's talked about earlier, is the kind of the core service for any kind of logging or alerting or metrics. And I'm going to start with metrics. So if I go into the metrics section in CloudWatch, and you can see I've got two different sections here. So I've got AWS metrics, and this is where you see your like CPU utilization, your actual infrastructure metrics. So I can go into my API, for example, and have a look at, not in there. I can look at the latency for my API, for example, and I can see that this will be a good metric to look at how quickly my application is responding to my users. So I can look at the latency, I can look at the number of errors. So I can see there's been a number of errors in my application. I can look at the total of how many requests
James,
there are. Yep.
can you zoom in a little bit so that it will be a little visible? Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, this is better. Much better. Thank you.
So I can look at the total number of requests that I received. So they're really useful infrastructure metrics. But I've also got some custom metrics as well. So if I just remove them metrics for a second and I look at my custom metrics, so I've actually started storing some simple metrics on the total number of orders I received. And this is just some fake. This isn't an actual order site. I'm not getting 12,000 orders in my e-commerce application. This is just some fake data I've loaded in. But I can start to see the total number of successful orders that was placed. And you can see here, I had a massive drop off all of a sudden in the number of orders that were being placed in my application. And that may be the sign of some kind of problem. But the same way, I can also look at failures. So I did have a couple of order failures throughout my system here. And this is where you get the value of both infrastructure metrics and application metrics. So if I now go on to logs now, so logs in CloudWatch are stored in groups, and you can define these log groups. And if I just go in to look at one of these log groups now, you see that I just get some a bunch of different information. If I look at a couple of these now, so you see this one here, this one's a bit more help, this one's a bit more complicated. So I've just got a lot of data. There's nothing easy to look at here. I can expand it, and you can see when I was talking about the structured log format, that's what I've built here. I've got this kind of structured format that gives me a common structure across all of my logs. And what I can then do, where I've got this trace identifier, I can actually use that to query my logs. So I can query across all of my logs if I go into log insights. and I save the query, I can then run a query for that identifier. That will then help me see all the logs for that identifier. Now, if all these logs were stored across multiple different applications, in one view now, I could run a query to see all of the logs for my application across all of the different services because I have got this common trace identifier. So it's really useful to structure your logs in that way because it turns them almost into a database, and you can treat your logs as a database with a schema, and you can actually query them. And then finally, I just wanted to really quickly touch on traces. So there's a lot of in-depth detail we could get to with traces. So I just wanted to cover it very quickly. But the service in AWS for tracing is called X-Ray. And if I go and look at traces now, and what traces will show me, and if I search for that same identifier that I just looked at the logs for, traces will actually give me some information about what exactly happened. So you can see that a client request came in, it talked to Lambda, and then I talked to a DynamoDB table, and I can see the different metrics for each different part of that and how long it took. So I can see the total request took 2.3 seconds, and I can actually look at the time it took for each individual part. So DynamoDB took 1.93 seconds to respond. The actual code ran for 2.3 seconds overall. So you can get some really good detail on exactly what is going on in your application when you need to debug. And if I come right down to the bottom here, you can also see the actual logs that also relate to that same trace identifier. So I can see all the logs and all my traces in one place. Now, where this gets really useful, to give you an example of where this will be really helpful, if you imagine you were building an application and there was a website on it and a user tried to do something and there was an error. So you might show a pop-up on the screen to the user that says there's been a problem. Now, if you have traces enabled and login enabled, you could, in that message that you pop up to the user, say, please contact support and give them this reference number. And so then when your users are actually raising issues with your system, they could raise them with a specific identifier. And then somebody who is supporting your application can just come into an interface like this and start to look at very specifically the exact data for that exact request that the user had a problem with. So yeah, that's what traces gives you. It gives you that really that detailed look at how a request moves through your system. One of the other really cool features that you get with traces is this service map feature, which is quite cool in that it will give you a map of all the different services that your application calls. And I can see that about 20% of my application code is failing and the other 75% is completing successfully. I can see that I'm talking to DynamoDB and also EventBridge up there. So that's logs, metrics, and traces. The three, as I said, are really important. They work really well together. Metrics is about monitoring and prediction and understanding what is happening, and logging and tracing is about going into your system and actually be able to debug and work out what has gone wrong in your application. I hope that was useful. Any questions at all, as always, please feel free to message me on LinkedIn or in the chat once I'm back in the chat window. And yeah, thank you. I believe we'll hand over to Jamila now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, James. It was interesting to see. And yeah, obviously, observability is an important aspect of well-architected framework. Whatever you do, you should have a mechanism to observe it. And otherwise, you are just like shooting into dark, have no idea on what is happening. So thanks for that. Okay, now I'll add myself back to the stream and then we can discuss a little bit more. Now, there was a question in the chat, hey, how the cruise control looks like. So people who do not drive car or not very aware about it, this is what a cruise control button looks like. If you see here in the middle, this is a cruise control and you could set it and it would help you to keep your tracking of the speed. Same thing like we did target tracking. We set CPU target. Here you could set speed target and your car would maintain that speed. That's what your cruise control feature is. Most of the cars have it. And when you're driving long distance, then this is a very useful feature because you don't have to keep on putting your foot on the speed accelerator. So it's a nice feature there. Thank you. Now let's hear from Jamila. And Jamila is going to talk about the much uh, unique feature of how Amazon interviews are conducted. That is what we call STAR technique. So thanks, Jamila, for walking us through STAR. I have added you, and I'll run your slides. Let me know when you want me to go to next. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish. Hi everyone, glad to be here again. So Ashish, I will need your assistance while I'm presenting. So please press the button for the next slide. I hope everyone is seeing the screen. Yeah, cool. So today I will be talking about STAR technique and how to answer behavioral interview questions. So what is STAR technique? So you probably have heard not only in Amazon or AWS, but also in other big companies or small companies even, when they are conducting interviews, you need to follow some kind of a structure. So have you heard about STAR format? Have you done similar things or not? Pop it in the chat. I'm gonna check it, and I will ask Ashish to press the button, which will explain what does S mean, T, A, and R means. Yes, I see no. Situation, task, action, and result. Correct. We got it right. Yeah, someone said covered STAR during AWS restart, which is cool. Some of you didn't use any STAR format, but I hope my example today that I will be talking about will be helpful for you all, and which will help you to navigate your interview process in the future. Just a quick disclaimer before I dive deep into details. The scenario I'm going to share here is not reflecting my previous employer and is not reflecting the job that I was doing there. Just to keep things keep things confidentially, and for the security perspective, I am not going to share today all the details as it happened in reality, but rather I'm going to modify and just create a fictional story and adjust it to the STAR format. And how would you usually answer during the interview? So it's just a quick disclaimer. Some of the bits and parts from that story might be true or might not be true. So this is just a fictional one that I'm going to share. And also I want to give a little bit of background. When I was interviewing at AWS, I was an application support engineer back in that time. And my scenario will be around support engineer role, what support engineer was doing and what was the challenge and what was the situation, task, and action and result I was facing at that time. Again, this is completely a fictional story, and it does not reflect my employer and the work that I was doing during my time in that company. So Ashish, please, let's move on to the next slide. So we see definitions of situation, task, action, and result. I'd like to walk through my story just to kind of bump everything here, and then I'm going to chop into details of each of the story and explain where was the situation, what is task here, what is the result, what is the action and result. So again, the background is that the person who is interviewee is application support engineer at company X, and that person is being asked about the situation where something unexpected has happened under a tight deadline and you have to perform. What was the challenge? How did you resolve it? So, and the story is about this. Couple of weeks ago, as part of my job scope, I was performing a migration action for one of our biggest and global customer whose environment used to be in the US region, but suddenly they decided to move to EU because they are closing their market in the US. Migration was planned from my US colleagues to be performed partially in the US and in the UK due to the time zone. All of a sudden, at 6 a.m., I received a call from my manager saying that, hey, we hit the issue. We took the snapshot, but we're not able to restore the snapshot. It's 6 a.m. in the morning in the UK, and customer will be up and running their application at 9 a.m. We need to solve this issue as soon as possible, and we need to somehow make it happen before customer actually realizes and before it actually affects customer's workload. And back in that time, my manager asked to check the restore snapshot option every 15 minutes. Because it was before COVID time, I was not able and I was not allowed to work from home. I had to go to the office at some point and work from the office. So I informed my manager that my office commute will take around 30 minutes. And what if I miss every 15 minutes to restore the snapshot during this time? Although my manager was okay with this issue being me during the commute time, I still thought that I need to do something more for my customer so they are not impacted with the with this issue. I ordered a taxi and I was trying to, I connected my laptop to the hotspot from my mobile data, and I was performing restore and restore snapshot while sitting in the taxi. When I arrived to work, I started immediately again restore the snapshot, but it wasn't working at all. No matter how many times I tried, it didn't work. And then I quickly realized that a few months ago, when I was collaborating with our infrastructure team and trying to understand what is actually the underlying root cause of some of the errors, some of the problems we're receiving as a support team, I remembered that there is one region which is under revision in Europe, and I thought, and it's not being done, so it's not being completed for migration. It's just something that infrastructure team is working, and I thought, let me maybe restore the snapshot in that region. Yes, it's not the same region that my manager asked to perform the restore, but it is something still in the EU, and it still might help my customer's application to be up and running right on time. It was 8 a.m. Back in that time, and I didn't tell my manager that I'm going to do this, because if she knew, she would probably say no, because it is still under revision and we don't know what kind of issues we might hit if we restore customers' live data in that new region. So what I did, I took the snapshot and then I restored in that new region. Snapshot was restored successfully, and by 9 a.m. customer was able to use the application as they were predicting. So when my manager, who was based in the US back in that time, started her work, I told her the story, what happened and what did I do. I knew it was something not expected and something probably not 100% right at that time, but I explained to her that I knew that this might resolve the issue without telling the customer that we hit specific limitation or specific issues, which doesn't give the customer that reliability and that confidence, and of course potentially it might hurt the trust that we built with the customer, given the fact that it was a big customer across the globe. My manager was very understanding. She appreciated my bias for action, as we say it now in Amazon. And back in that time, I didn't know that it was bias for action. And of course, she asked me to document everything what I did and the reason why I did that. And of course, I connected with infrastructure team to understand why initially the restore wasn't happening in one region specifically. And then working together with infrastructure team, we realized that we didn't have enough CPU and memory back in that region, the initial EU region. And the one region which was under revision had enough space and enough memory to perform the migration. So what happened is that the result, I documented everything, the problem, the solution, and the steps that I did. I connected with the infrastructure team to understand what is the limitation and in which cases we need to contact infrastructure team for approval during the migration. I conducted lunch and learn. I conducted lunch and learn with support team, which was across US, Canada, and UK. Plus infrastructure team, which was based in the US. And I ran the session where we were exploring the options, in which cases we need infrastructure's approval before actually scheduling and informing the customer about the migration. And also after all of this, once the customer's environment was migrated to the new region, of course, after some period, we were able, once we increased the memory in the initial region, I was able to migrate back to that initial region. So the result was that everything that what we did during that time, everything that I took ownership of, that is that it's not just the scope of your job that you are supposed to do, like check the restore snapshot every 15 minutes, make sure it happens. It doesn't happen. Sometimes it doesn't, because we didn't have enough memory, and me trying every 15 minutes would not resolve the memory issues, right? But what actually helped is that collaborating across the team, understanding the underlying root cause, what actually was what was causing that issue, and taking extra risk. I understand at that time my manager would have been probably angry at me, like, why did you do that? It could have harmed the customer's data, but because it was a snapshot, it wasn't. So even if it fails in the new region, I knew that I still can roll back. I still can keep the customer's migration back in that region. And we could have just notified the customer that, sorry, we hit the technical issue and we couldn't perform the migration back in that time. But I didn't want to do that, because, again, it hurts the customer trust. It hurts the image and how we position ourselves to our customers. So this was the story. This was the result, what I did. And this was the kind of based on the star format that I explained. Now I'm going to chop into all the details, like based on this, based on the situation, task, action, and result that you see on the screen. So let's start with the situation. Detail the background. As I said a couple of months ago, and I'm saying like where and when it happened, right? And I'm providing you the context. A couple of months ago, as a scope of my job, it is important to highlight it is your job to perform a migration. And also expect, if you're interviewing for AWS or Amazon, there will be follow-up questions. So the person who is interviewing you will not sit and say, wow, that was amazing, let me hire you. It doesn't happen, right? They will dive deep into details. For example, they will ask, what kind of migration was that? Why you are performing migrations? How often you are performing migrations? Have you had these sorts of issues before? And why your manager called you? Don't you have any system, any process? And then you say, no, we didn't have back in that time any process, any pager duty, anything. So as a part of the result, I took ownership. So now I talk like this, I took ownership, right? Back in that time, I was saying, no, we didn't have any process. And I was the one who tried to bring any process to this process by leveraging third-party tool like PagerDuty. And when support engineer is hitting any problems with migration, it gets automatically notified to infrastructure team and to the support team and up in the hierarchy as well. Previously, we didn't have that process. Now we do have. So just make sure that whenever the follow-up questions are happening, you are comfortable and confident enough to meet these questions and to answer them properly. This was the situation. And then task. Describe what was the challenge and expectations, right? So the challenge was that snapshot couldn't restore back in time. And my expectations from me try every 15 minutes. God knows, maybe it will happen, right? It is technology. It fails all the time. We never know. And what needed to be done? Migration needed to be completed by 9 a.m. UK time. So customers starting to work at 9 a.m. They should not experience any issues in their platform. Why? Because customers, they decided to close their market in the US, and they are migrating all their workload in EMEA, in EU. So what was the action? Yeah, what did I do? How did I do it? And what tools did I use? So be prepared. Like during my scenario, I didn't tell you what tools did I use when I was checking, right? But interviewer can ask you, what did you use? What tool did you use? And I said, Postman. It was an API call. I was checking, and then I was seeing and it was a JSON format. So be prepared to dive deep into details. And then interviewer can ask you, did you check maybe your API token is expired, right? If you're really using that tool, you will know that, yes, there is an API tool and there is a token that could have been expired probably, or you may have hit other sorts of issues related with Postman, not specifically with that application, right? So there will be follow-up questions. They won't be you just talking great, successful story. And again, it is not supposed to be great and successful all in all. Like in my story, for example, the one that I told you, as I said, my manager could have been really angry at me because I performed the migration in the region which is under revision, which is not ready, and which is not probably allowed to migrate customers there. But it was my as an emergency exit to put something there to keep the lights green for a couple of hours or for one day at least until we resolve this issue and get to the bottom why it's not working. And then once we resolved it, once we increased the limitation and the memory, of course we were able to go back. But expect from a hiring manager or whoever is interviewing you to ask you, what if your manager said no? What would you do? Would you still do the same thing if you go back? This is the most important question probably every interviewers are asking. Would you do the same thing? And what I answered back in that time, I said, yes, I would do the same. And then the other question was that, why? Because it was the right thing to do for my customer. I understand it might have violated some of the company's rules, but I knew even if it fails in that region, I can roll back. And it was like my safest option to tell the customer we didn't perform the migration because we had technical issue. But of course, it's not a good thing to tell your customers, right? You're not being like customer obsessed in this case, and you are not performing your 110% for your customer. So this was my action point. And what was the result, of course? Accomplishment. Yes, I completed the migration successfully. Customer didn't notice a thing at the end of the day. But there will be, again, follow-up questions from the interviewer that, did you get any recognition for the work that you did? Did I? I didn't. And what was your reaction when you didn't get any recognition? What did you do? What did you feel? How did you feel that you didn't get any recognition? So all these questions were asked, and I said, I didn't expect any recognition. Why you didn't expect? Do you think what you did does not deserve the recognition? And I said, no, I think it does deserve, but it doesn't mean whatever I do for recognition or for something from my manager or from my peers to recognize and to clap. No, I did it because of it was the right thing to do for my customer. And if it happens again, I would do the same again. I would still order a taxi. I did not expense the taxi money because I didn't do it for any other reasons. I did it for my customer because I knew this is a big customer, even for a small customer, doesn't matter. It will affect my customer's workload and it might damage my customers' trust that I built over time. And as a whole company, we built it over time. Yes, I didn't receive any recognition. I didn't need that. Fine. If I receive, of course, it's a nice thing to receive. If I didn't, okay, it is my job to keep my customer obsession at the highest level. That's how I work. I can't work differently. And savings, what did I save for the company, right? It's not about money, right? What I say for the company is that I documented everything what happened in more details. I published it in our internal tool. I published it, and then I ran lunch and learn session with infrastructure team and with our support team. I also own the process to have pager duty, where if the migration fails, it gets notified. It gets notified infrastructure team and support team as well at the same time. So it's not just support who are using who are using something and who need to deal with all this with all these problems. And also, of course, these things can happen, right? It is technology. It is important to keep your morale and during the interview, not just saying that, yes, it was difficult, I managed, look at me, I'm just a star, I did this, I did that. No, it is important to keep your morale that, yes, this thing happened, and it's not because there was no process, it was company's fault, or it was incompetent something. No, these things can happen everywhere, anywhere, and it is crucially important to keep it in mind and have that attitude and mentality that wherever you go, no matter is it a startup, is it a big company, is it a medium company, no matter where you go, anything, if it's related to technology, anything can happen. Absolutely anything. And it is important, your attitude. What do you do in this case? And what did you do in that case? Did you just sit and do what you've been asked for? Like check every 15 minutes, check if it restore happens or not. Yeah, I mean, if I did that, of course my manager wouldn't say anything, and I would say, yeah, that's what you asked me and that's what I did, right? It is just the narrow scope of your job that you performed. Yeah, well done, that's what you are paid for, right? But what you as a leader, because everyone here, when we're working, we are leaders, we take actions, we make decisions every day for our customers, for our colleagues, for our leaders, and we try to deliver the results based on our customer obsession, of course. What did you do in that case, right? Everything is failing. What are you doing? What you are prioritizing? Are you prioritizing just business? Did I do it because of the business, because of the company I'm working for? Or do I do it for my customer, which is also affecting the business, of course? So customer is not just the random people passing by, right? It is my company's customer. It means I'm owning it. It is my customer too. So it is important to keep this mentality, to be humble, that whatever happened there is not X person's fault, this team's fault. I don't know. This is just a company. They haven't predicted. Oh, they didn't have a process in place. Well, great. Then own it. They didn't have a process. It means it's your time to shine, your time to step in, own it, make a process, and be known for that, right? You cannot even imagine how much I learned just based on that story. And it is a fictional story, of course, right? Just like having a process, bringing something, doing something, taking extra actions. And no matter, again, if it's a small company, startup, or a big company, you will experience the same thing over and over again. And you will be the one who will make this decision, who will learn on it. And you will feel at the end proud that there was a gap. You didn't sit and complain like, oh, this company doesn't meet my expectations. I thought this is blah, blah, blah. It will happen, blah, blah, blah. No, it doesn't happen. It's probably in the movies or in an ideal and pinky world, in a fluffy unicorn world, as my daughter loves to say, right? Everywhere you will have any gaps, anything that is broken, the page is not updated. Great, It's your opportunity. Just take it and do it. It doesn't mean that it has to completely be broken, so you are required to fix it. Yeah, if it's your job, then do it. But if it's not, it means you're going outside of the scope of your job that you are required to do. So in this case, you just take it, own the process, collaborate across teams, learn and be curious. So at that time, I didn't even notice that it was learn and be curious, or it was bias for action, or it was customer obsession, right? Or it was disagree and commit, right? My manager knew definitely that there is a new region under revision, right? It was just me who decided for the customer to do it. Again, it could have failed, right? And you will have this question in the interview. What if failed? What customer lost the data? Were you sure that it will not affect your customer for 100% and it will not affect their live data? And I said, yes, I was sure it will not affect. It will, I can roll back. I had mechanisms, I had tools. And again, be prepared to answer these questions as well. What tools did you have? What mechanisms did you have to answer all these questions? Again, this was my story. This was a fictional story. Again, it does not represent my previous employment or previous job that I did, but it was crafted and designed for this session. I was an application support engineer, and the work that I was doing for on a day-to-day job, of course, I will not disclose here for confidentiality reasons. But this is something as an example you can take it, and just to kind of tailor your own story and understand what you can do with your role and in your current role and going forward. Thank you.
Nice. So amazing stories, Amila, and completely customer obsession. And these are not the things which you can find on YouTube or read a blog and it will talk about it. This all comes from experience, and that makes this BeSA program unique. And we are planning similar session into next sessions also. Like we will be completing the technical part in the next week, and then we will add more sessions like this. I'm adding Prasad and James also on the stream, and we would have lots of discussion. We are looking to get hiring manager talk to you about what they look into hiring. We are looking for candidates who pass the interview and tell their story, that how they passed the interview, what kind of challenges they faced, what was the interview process. We are talk to some recruiter to come here and say, hey, how they look for CVs or how they do for identifying who is the right fit for the job. So be tuned. We are not keeping second stage only for few people. We are opening it for everyone, so everyone would be allowed to join. That should not be an issue. And we are trying to bring more ideas, and if you have any ideas, let us know. We would try to accommodate it. If you want to hear something, any specific challenges you faced, any process which is not clear, and if it is something like general concern, we would try to address also into this program. So keep your thoughts coming, keep your suggestions coming into LinkedIn group, and we will look into it. And I appreciate you still being here 15-minute extra into the talks. We really appreciate it. We understand everyone's time is important, and we really appreciate that you were there to hear from Jamila and hopefully got a better understanding. So we will post recording, and we would try to answer as many questions as we have. Send a suggestion. And next week we are planning, if you remember, Prasad asked a question that, hey, what kind of database you would use for a startup. So we would use that as a mechanism next time, and we will try to answer that question. And that next time would be microservices. I'll talk about that technical things, and James will be talking on a use case, and Prasad would be talking about the database question. And probably we are thinking that to give you a question into LinkedIn group, which you could answer in star format, and we may dissect it into the next meeting. So we are still thinking about it. If we come to conclusion, we will put that question into LinkedIn group, and you can then answer it there, and we can pick up one answer and start dissecting it, that hey, what could be done better, or what can be some follow-up questions on that. So thanks everyone. Thanks Prasad. Thanks
Just
James. Thanks Jamila.
one thing here.
Go ahead,
So
sir.
Jamila, thank you so much. It was awesome
Exactly.
listening to you. It was too good. Uh, uh, Thank you everyone who actually replied on the LinkedIn about the database question. We'll dive deep into it. Questions like that are an opportunity for you not only to show your technical capability, but also your consulting skills and leadership principles. I will talk about how you can answer technical questions showing your behavioral skills, right? So we'll see, I'll try and phrase something and put it on the LinkedIn group, or if not, I did not get time this week to do that. If not, we will be discussing that in detail in our next session. But yeah, thank you all for staying late.
Thank you. So we will meet next week. Look for the links, and I have put some workshop detail also if you want to play around. And have a good one. We will talk to you next week. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.